Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. This is session number 346, and tonight is our penultimate session in the Chamber of Mazarbul. As I think by the third slide from now, we will be in the corridor outside the Chamber of Mazarbul. But we're actually leaving. We're actually leaving the Chamber of Mazarbul, which we have spent quite a long time in. But that's all right. It has been a wonderful visit to the Chamber of Mazarbul, and I don't regret a second of it. All right. Let us jump straight into our text here today and watch Frodo get injured again. By the way, do you notice how much of a beating Frodo takes over the course of this story? There are really very few. I mean, Boromir, spoiler, Boromir's going to die outright. But apart from Boromir, there are really quite few injuries anywhere in the company. And yet, Frodo is injured again and again and again throughout the story, right? He's already had one close call with his knife wound at Weathertop. He's going to get skewered like a wild boar here. Then this, of course, is going to be one of the lesser of his injuries under the circumstances. And then, of course, he's going to be still further injured by sting and tooth later on in the journey. So yes, of those who survived, which is most of them, he is, Maureen, just as you say, the most wounded. And I think that that's very important. There are ways in which Frodo's quite battered and scarred body, by the time he gets back to the Shire, is really sort of serves as an outward sign of his inward damage, right? It's the injury that you can't see that is really hurting him at the end, and why he leaves to find the healing that he fails to find in Middle-earth. I'm just full of spoilers here today, aren't I? So that's going to be an important thing that's going to be happening. I think that, however, it is interesting that we see he's a magnet for punishment throughout this entire trip, really. And much more so than any of the other characters. And again, I think that it's an important element of his role to be wounded and to take it and to persevere and to suffer is a huge part of Frodo's role in this story. A huge part, it seems, of what in the end Tolkien felt was the lot of the ring bearer. And if you think about it, I never really thought about this before. One of the things that's always kind of puzzled me about The Lord of the Rings is the title. The Lord of the Rings, of course, is Sauron. Why Tolkien should name the book Sauron, essentially, name it The Lord of the Rings, it's never been perfectly clear to me. And it's even more interesting to me by the fact that he, it is it's called the downfall of the Lord of the Rings, and, the downfall of the Lord of the Rings and the Return of the King, the whole title and stuff. Yeah. The fuller title is much clearer. But Tolkien never referred to it by that title. Not only is that not, in fact, on the title page of the actual book, but that wasn't even an editorial decision, right? I mean, like the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, those are editorial decisions, and Tolkien wasn't hugely fond of them. Of course, as you know, Tolkien didn't want to publish it in 3 parts at all. He wanted to publish it as one big book, but for practical reasons, it was deemed impracticable. And anyway, so, but The Lord of the Rings wasn't like that. The Lord of the Rings was, he was calling it The Lord of the Rings long before it was published. I mean, again, as I shared last week, I've been slowly, sort of a few a day, rereading my way through Tolkien's letters recently, and came across this again, like the early date. It was by like 39 that he was calling it The Lord of the Rings. He was barely halfway done with the book before he was calling it The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, so it's not that I think it's a bad title. Like, I'm not saying I don't think the title works or doesn't sound good or something like that. Like, it's fine. It's good. It sounds nice, but it's not transparent to me why it fits, why Sauron himself should be. Anyway, but here's the thing that just occurred to me, why I got into that little sidebar. And that's because I think about the, Pippin's little witticism that Gandalf scolds him for in Rivendell, right? When he says, make way for our cousin Frodo, the Lord of the Ring. And then Gandalf yells at him, right? The tension between, like, the real question, right? In one sense, is who's going to be the Lord of the Ring? And what I'm coming back to, and the reason that Frodo's injuries were making me think about this, is that what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to be the hero of this book? What is the job of the hero of this book? And in as much as Frodo is the hero, I mean, obviously we know that Sam is the hero, but in as much as Frodo is the central character and the protagonist of this book, what is his role? What does it mean to be the ring bearer? Because it really does establish something, a very different kind of heroism. It's not, is it about accomplishing something great? Kind of. Did Frodo accomplish something great? Almost, right? It's a great act of, it's a great act of humility. It's a heroic act of humility, which is itself almost, not quite, but almost, an oxymoron, right? But yeah, Bjorning, just as you say, the heroism is not tied to victory. It's tied to sacrifice. Exactly. That's, in the end, what it means to be the hero of this book. And so there's a really interesting way in which it feels the one who is trying to be the main character, right? The one who really has main character syndrome and wants to make everything about him, wants to be the center of everything and to control everything, and to bring everything to himself, is the Lord of the Rings. But it isn't just that character is the villain instead of the hero of this story. It's not even just that he loses that particular one who thinks he's the hero, right? The really remarkable thing about the Lord of the Rings is that the Lord of the Rings himself never appears in the story at all. Right? We never see him. Sauron never comes onto the stage, in fact. Right? So the central character, the one who has protagonist, the protagonist syndrome, the one who wants to be the center of the story, the one who is the complete antipathy of the kind of sacrificing and humble central figure, right? That this contrast between the Lord of the Rings on the one hand and the ring bearer on the other hand, right? That tension is really brought out by the title, by frankly, the irony of the title, right? Yeah, and it's certainly, Emily, I certainly agree that him not appearing makes him much more scary and menacing. But again, it's what makes it, to me, weirder to name the book after him. But again, this was an early idea of Tolkien's. Like, he settled on this ironic title, and I can't think of it as anything but Nerda Sapiens. It's just exactly it. I can't think of it anything but ironic. And that irony, long before he really knew how Frodo's journey was going to end, certainly didn't know how the story as a whole, like the actual last chapter, was going to end. He was already giving it this ironic. I think the one thing he did know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think, I'm recalling back to the drafts of The Lord of the Rings from the history of Middle-earth, and I don't think there's any draft in which Sauron ever comes onto the stage. There were times in earlier drafts where it was going to be more, more sort of flamboyant, like the, fight between Sam and the Nazgul at the Cracks of Doom and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it was never the plan. So I think that this irony, the irony of the book's title, was seemed to be a feature in Tolkien's imagination from quite early on in the story. And that strikes me as really revealing. Yeah, strikes me as very revealing. He did always know that Frodo wouldn't throw the ring into the fire. Yeah. What I was thinking of there, Nancy, when I was talking about the last chapters is, like, for instance, how his first impulse with the Scouring of the Shire, the first draft of the Scouring of the Shire has Frodo as the martial hero, right? He has Frodo leading all the battles and then literally fighting a boss fight with the giant orc named Sharky in the first draft. So he did still kind of make Frodo's career end in that heroic mold before he realized, like, no, that's wrong. That's not how it should go at all. This isn't Frodo's trajectory, in fact. And so he changed the ending and turned Frodo into what he, shifted Frodo to what to what we see, right? But yeah, Maureen, you're right. Maureen says this book is really a battle to prevent anybody from having the title, The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. And I will add, just as a side note on this side note, I have loved, especially in the final episode of season 2 of The Rings of Power, I've loved what The Rings of Power has done with the irony of that title. Celebrimbor's spitting the title of Lord of the Rings back at Sauron as he was dying was phenomenally played. I love the way that they are really building up that irony. And I thought that was really phenomenal. Yes, I know, Fencing Frog. We're getting right to the text. This is our version of getting right to the text. I know. But hey, if reflecting on the fact that Frodo's getting injured again leads me to random reflections on the significance of the title of the book, if I can't ramble on that sort of thing here, where can I ramble on that sort of thing? Right. So we've gone back to the title page, but we're good. We're good. Yeah. Okay. And then now let's get back to the chamber. All right. Balinor says next up, a discussion of the ISBN number. Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Um, and yes, Jackrabbit, that's the second quotation. That's the second messianic quotation that you have made. And I should acknowledge that. I think you're quite right. Bjorning had said, talked about Frodo emptying himself for the quest. And to which Jackrabbit is quoting from Isaiah 53, emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. And earlier on, quoting the same messianic chapter of the book of Isaiah, Jackrabbit was talking about Frodo being acquainted with grief. Yes, being a suffering servant and acquainted with grief. Yes, it is true that in these ways. Now, one of the things. Okay, hang on. I'm putting on a timer. I'm timing myself. I got 2 minutes. All right. Because I don't want to go on too much of a tangent on this. One of the things that I think in English, in literature discussions, in like college literature discussions in high school and stuff, in English classes, the idea of a Christ figure is really significantly abused. And a lot of people go hunting for Christ figures in things. And that's an awkward game to play. First of all, the first reason that I find it often abused, what I mean by abused is that often nothing is done with it, right? I mean, it turns into a weird game played by people who don't read much allegory and so aren't used to thinking systematically about symbols being used systematically and stuff. And so it's like, okay, you've identified some ways in which some characters are like Jesus. Now what? What does that mean? How does that function within the story and what's going on with that? And also too easily that becomes oversimplified in people's minds. Frodo is Jesus, or unless Gandalf is Jesus because he comes back from the dead, or and like it just leads to sort of confusion, I think, very frequently. So Alexandra, yeah, I do tend to think that the biggest part of the problem is not enough interpretation, essentially. Like it sort of note things and then just too often. The biggest problem in literary interpretation is not going far enough, is not answering the so what question, right? So you observe something, so what? What does that mean? What is the point? And the point here, as my timer goes off, so that's to stop my ranting for more than 2 minutes about the abuse of the idea of the Christ figure in literature. But the use of it in Frodo's case, this Jackrabbit's observation is important, right? Tolkien has, I think, gone out of his way to show Frodo being Christ-like. That to be the ring bearer is like taking up one's cross. And this is not because he is making, Frodo is not like Jesus in anything like the way in which Aslan is like Jesus in the Chronicles of Narnia. Lewis and Tolkien are doing quite different things there. They're dealing with the same ideas, but they're dealing with them differently. Not that they're disagreeing with each other, but they're dealing with them differently. And it's, yes, exactly. Aslan is Jesus. He's not like Jesus. Yes, precisely, Emily. And but with Frodo, the point, I think, again, inasmuch as there is a pointer message there, what he's doing is showing the hero of his book is being Christ-like. He isn't Christ, right? He is not a symbol of Jesus. He's not trying to teach us something about Jesus or something like that. He is following in the footsteps of Jesus, which, of course, is what all Christians were called upon to do, as Tolkien is well aware. and as Tolkien obviously reflected on quite a lot. You can see that in some of his letters also. So yes, is Frodo like Jesus? He is. And his heroism that's a big part of the quality of his heroism. In Tolkien's mind, in fact, I suspect that is one of the things that Tolkien was thinking about when many of you are familiar with, of course, the famous letter in which Tolkien calls The Lord of the Rings a thoroughly Catholic work. And I suspect that it's one of the things that he was thinking of when he said that. Now, there are lots of things that he could be thinking of, and I'm sure he was thinking of a whole bunch of things at once there. But I think it's one of the things, right, to the way that he redefines heroism through Frodo, and Frodo's suffering, and Frodo's endurance, and what it means for Frodo to be the ring bearer, and what it costs Frodo to be the ring bearer, is very much has Christ as a model in mind. So Jack Rabbit, your Isaiah 53 quotations are perfectly apposite in that way. But I don't spend too much time talking about Christ figures, again, usually because I find that people spend too much time talking about them and not enough time saying anything interesting about them in general. So I don't tend to go there very often, but it's certainly worth noticing. Yeah, Jackie, you're right. Jackie says he discusses this at length in letter 181. Yes, exactly. Yes. Okay. I have an idea. Let's read the first slide. But even as they retreated, and before Pippin and Merry had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Behind him his followers clustered in the doorway. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Andúril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling, as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Doom, doom, went the drums in the deep. The great voice rolled out again. Now, shouted Gandalf, now is the last chance. Run for it. All right. The helm burst asunder is so good, Johnny, isn't it? Tolkien loves that phrase, burst asunder, right? Sometimes things can be cloven asunder too, and we get cleave, in the next sentence. But burst asunder is pretty good. Yeah, cool. The flash-like flame is like Fingolfin's death in the Silmarillion. Lord of Salamendasteron. Wow, that's a lot. Yes, I agree. Yeah, so Maureen, thank you. Let's go back to the part I screwed up, because that's really interesting to say. His broad, flat face was swart. That phrase is a real mouthful. His broad, flat face. It's the R and then the L. The consonant L, consonant R, and then consonant L. That just threw me. His broad, flat face. Do you hear me? I said fat face first because I didn't want to do the liquid in there. Didn't want to do the L. Yeah. I see Madman 22 on YouTube saying that he can't believe Peter Jackson didn't give us a single head explosion. Um, yes. Yes. And yes, Jackie was swart. I think also I was prepared for like fat face alliterates better, right? But instead, you see what we get. Once again, he's doing that thing where he's not just alliterating; he's playing with sounds like like the single oblong block. Remember that? When he takes these few sounds and he kind of combines them together. So here what he does is flat face is almost alliterative, right? But we get we get a similar, not exactly identical vowel, but a similar vowel. And then the same initial consonant. But the middle word of those three words, broad, flat, face, the middle one is like halfway between, right? It is connected to face with the F and the A, but it's connected to broad by the vowel and the liquid, BR and FL. So with the way that phrase comes out, it's complicated to say because of the like similarity, but non-identical phrases, right? Touradel, I did not know. Is that true? I didn't know that. Helm and helmet? That a helmet is a mini helm? Covering just the top of the head, not the neck or the ears and cheeks? Helm is Old English, yes. But helmet is a diminutive? I mean, it makes sense etymologically. Wow. I never heard that in my life. It makes perfect sense as soon as you think about it. It's a female helm. Yeah, that's how you can tell this orc was a boy. Right? Yeah, no, yeah, a mini helm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Graham, exactly. I was thinking the same thing. Like a mallet is a diminutive of a maul. Yes. Yes, a maul is a huge sledgehammer, and a mallet is a little hammer. A mallette, right? Cask and casket? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Cabin and cabinet? Sure, my goodness. That's amazing. Yes. Perfect sense. And it's a modern word. Touradel says the first usage is 15th century. Well, that's another reason why he would prefer helm, because helm is the Old English word, and helmet is a modern affectation. Wow. Huh. Yeah, and ET is from French. It's not just a diminutive, it's a French diminutive, right? But as we were discussing last time, I think it was last time or the time before, he's using French words even as we go. But yeah, I mean, the 15th century is pretty newfangled. Fencing frog, it's certainly true. Yeah, very interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. But I'm not being very systematic. Let's talk about syntax. Notice what Tolkien does in this paragraph. Notice how he handles the pacing in this paragraph. Listen to the pacing of the sentences again. But even as they retreated, and before Merry and Pippin had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Behind him his followers clustered in the doorway. Sentence 1. Huge sentence 1. His broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a great spear. Sentence 2. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. Sentence 3. Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. 4. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. 5. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. 6. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Andúril came down upon his helm. 7. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Notice what he does here. Notice how notice how he shortens this. He's got these long sentences at the beginning. And they're complicated sentences. Even as they retreated, subordinate clause. And before Merry and Pippin had reached the stair outside. Compound, subordinate clause. A huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. So we get two phrases describing the huge orc chieftain in between the noun and the verb. Orc chieftain leaped into the chamber. And we're still not done. Semicolon. Behind him, comma, not comma, but initial phrase, his followers clustered in the doorway. And then his broad, flat face was swart, his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. 3 independent clauses. And notice he's not just doing parataxis here. He could have just done it. He could have been like, his broad, flat face was swart, and his eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. That would be a more fully paratactic feel, but it's not. They're in a series. 3 clauses with an and between the last 2. Semicolon, he wielded a great spear. Notice, again, the pacing on this. Both times, the part in the first 2 sentences, the part of the sentence after the semicolon is far shorter than the initial part. The initial first half of the sentence is long and complicated and contains a whole bunch of clauses. And then you've got a simple sentence after the semicolon. A simple clause, after a simple independent clause. With a thrust of his huge hide shield, he turned Boromir's sword and bore him backwards, throwing him to the ground. So we get 3 actions, 2 of which are in, 1 of which, 4 actions. 4 actions by the orc chieftain. The first one is in a prepositional phrase. The next 2 are in compound verbs. He turned, so with a thrust, the thrust is the first action. He turned and bore him backwards. And then, so that's the compound actual verb. And then a verbal phrase, a participial phrase, throwing him to the ground. So he thrust, turned, bore, and threw. 4 actions by the orc chieftain, but done differently, right? Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake. So we get the first action, again in an initial phrase, this time a participial phrase, but with a whole metaphorical prepositional phrase in there, with the speed of a striking snake. He charged, that's final air subject in verb. into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. Once again, 3 actions. Dive, he dove, he charged, and he thrust in this sentence. So this orc, right? He's like verbs all over the place, right? Look at all these actions he's performing. Now notice what happens. So all of that is the orc chieftain. The orc chieftain is doing stuff, right? Yes, Alexander, he's acting. So many things are happening. But like this one guy, this one huge orc chieftain is doing so many things. And yes, I agree, Eric. You're right that the thrust of his huge hide it's not exactly 4 separate actions. The thrust of his huge hide shield accomplishes 3 things, right? Turning the sword, bearing him backwards, and throwing him to the ground. You're right. But yeah, but you're right. That's exactly it. 1 action, 4 well, technically thrust is a noun, but yeah, like 4 actions, right? Again, it's a single action, but he's packing so much active language in here. And that's coupled with the while at the same time, he is glomming all of these clauses together, right? And you can feel it. Can't you feel it? How much is happening here and how fast things are going? Sometimes when Tolkien goes fast, he does parataxics. He takes simple phrases and just links them together with conjunctions. But here this is like a frozen moment, right? This sudden explosion by this huge orc chieftain takes all of them by surprise, right? Bowls Boromir over, dodges Aragorn, skewers Frodo. And once again, notice how his style, right? How Tolkien's syntax here is moderating, is influencing our experience of this. Once again, he's doing what we've seen him do so many times before, recently, in as we've been looking at these passages in the battle in the Chamber of Mazarbul, in the lead up to it. He's giving us the experience. He's putting us in the position of the people in the room, right? This, doubtless, is how it looks to Sam. Sudden flurry of actions happening, right? This one guy is everywhere. Yeah, this one guy is everywhere. And he does, if we count actions, I'm not going to count clad because that's just describing, maybe he clad himself and maybe he didn't. So I'm not even going to count that as an action. Leaped, wielded, thrust, turned, bore, throw, dive, charged, thrust. And then if we give him, that's 9. And then if we give him credit for was hurled and was pinned, that's 11. Now there's an important shift at that point, right? But still, he does he does a whole lot of things. Yeah. The interruptions, that is like, again, that first sentence, he isn't just stringing together clauses. He's using hypertaxis here. That is the subordination and stuff, right? Why? Why is he doing that instead of the rolling parataxis? Because this is unexpected. This is supposed to feel jerky. Even as they retreated. So we're in the middle of retreating, right? Gandalf said, quick, let's leave. And we're like, okay, we're leaving. But as they're leaving, all of a sudden they're interrupted. And notice how immediately it interrupts it. But even as they retreated, and before Merry and Pippin had reached the stair outside, a huge orc chieftain, almost man-high, clad in black mail from head to foot, leaped into the chamber. Again, that's extravagant. In English, you can't separate the subject and the verb to opposite ends of the sentence in English quite as comfortably as you can do it in like Latin or Greek. Okay, right? When you've got an inflected language, you can do funky things with word placement. English makes that harder, right? So you can separate the subject and the verb and put a whole bunch of stuff in between them, but there are consequences when you do. That is, it's easy for a reader to lose track of what verb goes with what noun, and, you know, you could cause confusion and delay. But notice the effect that he creates here. A huge orc chieftain leaped into the chamber. Could have just said that, right? This orc chieftain, he wants to describe him. He wants us to picture him. Unlike the orcs, remember last week we were talking about how we're never told what orcs look like. We're just told orcs came into the room. We know nothing about them. We can't picture them. At least we can picture them, but we're left wholly free to picture them however we want to. This he doesn't do. And again, we were foreboding last week that we were going to get more description this week. But notice why? Notice the difference. This is like a frozen image. Out of nowhere, this guy appears. And he's not just a blur. They see him. He's huge. How huge? He's almost man-high. Oh, well, that tells us something about orcs, doesn't it? If an orc that is like, you know, approaching 6 feet high is huge, then the rest of them are significantly smaller, right? Are orcs fully hobbit-sized? Probably not. But sounds like, again, if almost man-high, not quite man-high, is not just above average, but huge, the rest of the orcs are probably quite short. Probably, you don't have to be 6 feet tall to be man-high, JJ. I'm not implying that. I'm just thinking of the men in question who are standing in the room right here. So, Dr. Benway, I do the extra description is to enhance the moment. To enhance that is, we're getting these like flashbulb moments. We get this picture of him, clad in black mail from head to foot. So they're all turning to leave. And then, you know, right at that moment, right before they'd reached the stair outside, bam! Huge orc chieftain, clad in black mail from head to foot. His broad face, I can't even say it. His broad, flat face was swart. His eyes were like coals, and his tongue was red. He wielded a spear. Flashbulb image, right? It's like Frodo will never forget the face of this orc chieftain, right? Like because it's coming right at him, right? Yes, Balinor, exactly. Just as you were pointing out that Jackie said, when time slows down in an emergency. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's Dizzy. I think this is Frodo's details here. Yeah, I think it's it's Frodo's detail. I suspect, because it's coming right at his face, right? Then we got all of his actions, all the thrusting and bearing and throwing and diving and charging and thrusting. He thrusts the shield first and he thrusts the spear second, right? Yes, Alexandra, I do believe that the clad in black male from head to foot he's different, not just in that he's bigger than the other orcs, but presumably he's better equipped as well. Yeah. You can see, again, even without paying attention to what's exactly being described, you can hear in this, you can see in his syntax where the turning point of the paragraph, right? Where does the pace of this paragraph change? Diving under Aragorn's blow with the speed of a striking snake, he charged into the company and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Do you hear it? What happened there? Notice the verbs changed. Remember, one of the features of the earlier paragraphs, the paragraphs leading up to this, remember all of those disembodied actions? Remember how stuff just kept happening and we almost never saw anybody doing it? Or, like feet. Feet just running up and down the hallway all by themselves. But Alexander, that's exactly right. It's the passive voice for Frodo. Yeah. Sorry, Jenny. So I keep thinking my audio feed is paused, but it's just my dramatic timing. It's so true. Sorry about that. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. The attention focuses at that point. The focus shifts at that point. We've had the orc chieftain doing, verb for the orc chieftain. And then his final action, and thrust with his spear straight at Frodo. The blow caught him on the right side. So this is no longer, again, it is the blow of the orc chieftain, right? But grammatically, now it's just the blow itself doing something, catching him on the right side. And now Frodo is being hurled, and he's being pinned against the wall. Frodo is experiencing passion, as you say, Vardendil. That is, that's a, I assume, Vardendil, that you were also thinking vaguely back to our Christ figure discussion. The reason, in case you didn't know, the reason why pictures of Jesus on the cross are called the Passion is from the word passion. It comes from, as Vardendil says, from the word passive. That is, not to be the actor, to suffer something, to be the one to whom actions are being done. And Frodo is the object of actions. He is certainly experiencing passion in that very obscure sense. Now, quick, hey, quick duck man who was once Two Juice Man. is pointing at the spear in the side. I hadn't noticed that. On the subject of Christ imagery, I hadn't noticed that either. But yeah. Yes. The blow caught him on the right side, and Frodo was hurled against the wall and pinned. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. Notice even there, Sam is now, we have an action, the hacking. Sam's hacking is back to the active voice. But then even and it broke. Once again, it's not Sam with a cry hacked at the spear shaft and broke it. Right? Sam doesn't get two verbs. He gets one verb. And then the spear gets a verb. Breaking. The spear broke. And now we get the orcs doing things, right? The orc gets all verby again, briefly. Even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar. Notice what happened? What he did syntactically? That orc gets two more verbs, right? From his long list of verbs, he gets two more. But they're in a subordinate clause. But even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, too late. He doesn't get another main verb. And Duril came down upon his helm. And notice there again, it's not Aragorn doing the action. This same tendency of the description to just describe things happening, like the feet in the hallway outside, like the door, all that stuff we were looking at last week. Let me go ahead a second, go back a second rather. Remember, there was a crash on the door. Rams and hammers were beating. The opening grew wide. Arrows came whistling in, but struck the northern wall and fell harmlessly to the floor. There was a horn blast and a rush of feet. And then orcs, one after another, leaped into the chamber. Yes. No, it broke. It's the subject. Broke is the verb, and the spear did it. It broke. I mean, you could say he broke it, in which it is the direct object and broke is the verb. But that's not, again, English word order. If he meant the verb broke to be a verb with the noun Sam as the subject, he'd have had to say, and broke it. And it broke. Yeah. So again, remember why what the effect that we were seeing from all that in the previous passage. We are being made immediate spectators to things happening that I'm going to come back to truncheon, guys. I'm trying to finish this thing about the syntax first, and then we'll come back to the truncheon. I think that this is almost entirely, from Frodo's point of view, right? Eric, I think most traditionally visual images of the crucifixion depict the spear wound in Christ's right side. I don't think the text specifies, but traditional imagery has the spear wound on Christ's right side. Yes. So again, why does Tolkien not say Andúril came down, but even as the orc flung down the truncheon and swept out his scimitar, Aragorn brought Andúril down upon his helm? And I think the answer is that's not what Frodo sees. Frodo, what is he seeing? He is staring straight into the broad, flat face of the orc. And then he sees Andúril coming down upon it. Andúril came down upon his helm. There was a flash. Again, remember how so much of the action in this sequence has been brought to you by the phrase, there was? There was a thing that happened, right? Again, it's been the mode all the way through. There was a flash like flame, and the helm burst asunder. The orc fell with cloven head. That short sentence is the finale, right? His followers fled howling as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. And I love the way Tolkien brings all of this together with alliteration, specifically F and FL. Do you notice that? The orc flung down his truncheon, and then there was a flash like flame. The orc fell, his followers fled howling. Yes, and only after the orc has fallen, Frodo is able to see what happens behind the corpse. Yes, yes. And yes, I agree, the assonance is as well. Followers fled howling, with the FL in the middle, right? Followers fled howling. Yes, it's lovely. It's lovely. I would also add, Eric, even fell and cloven. It adds the C sound, right? And the O, but the VEN, the L and the VEN in cloven that's the same sounds as fell, right? Except with the voiced version with the V instead. Yeah. Exactly. Now, we can get back to what he's actually describing. Frodo is speared in the right side, and he's hurled against the wall. So presumably it's the left side of Frodo that hits the wall. I'm assuming Frodo's getting hit end on here. And it's not, because if he were being hit in the right side in the front, he'd get all spun around. And it doesn't describe him getting spun around. So presumably Frodo is Frodo is like turning to run. So he's not facing the door, right? So he's turning to run, and then all of a sudden there's the ruckus, right? Because this orc chieftain's name might be Ruckus. And then Ruckus comes in and comes bowling over Boromir, dashing under Aragorn, and then wham! Into Frodo's side as he's standing there. And then he gets slammed against the wall. And he's pinned there, presumably by the point of the spear. Ruckus sounds like a good name for an orc chieftain, doesn't it? Now, JJ, we'll come back to that question. We'll come back to the question of why Frodo from the orc's perspective. But, okay, Frodo is hurled against the wall and pinned. That would hurt a whole lot. Yes, the mithril coat is stopping the spearhead from actually sliding between Frodo's ribs. But if any of you have ever been punched in the ribs, it hurts. As many of you know, I do karate, and one of the things that we do in my stuff, we have a special. So we'll do a straight punch, but we'll also do a one knuckle punch like this, where you curl your thumb under your first knuckle so that when you hit, you're striking with that knuckle. And that is one of the main things that's designed for, is punching people in the ribs with, because it hurts like crazy to not just get punched in the ribs, but to get stabbed in the ribs. The chainmail will disperse the force of it a lot, but man, that is going to hurt a lot. If you've ever gotten a serious poke in the ribs, it's not great at all. And yes, exactly. Quick duck man. Frodo is still hit with tremendous force. Yes, exactly. Just like it hurts to get shot when you're wearing a bulletproof vest, right? It will probably not kill you, but it does not feel good, right? Even though, the force is dispersed, right? JJ was thinking of the same thing. He is going to have a killer bruise there. And it would be really kind of surprising if he didn't have a cracked rib or two there. It's a serious deal. Sam, so with a cry, that certainly means a shout, right? So Sam is certainly not crying. When cry is used as a noun, I think it always means a sudden shout. So Sam shouts in presumably horror, dismay, and alarm, and then hacks at the spear shaft and breaks it. This seems to me, of all of the things described in this scene, the most remarkable and slightly improbable. That's the hard part. Now, I'm willing to... Cutting through the shaft of a spear with a sword is deeply non-trivial. Deeply non-trivial. In one blow, exactly. Yeah, it's... Now, he doesn't say that he clove it in two. This is where I come back to the syntax. He hacked at the spear shaft and it broke. Now, Nancy, I do think it's possible that hacked at might suggest more than one blow. If so, he's got to act pretty fast. He can't have time for that many. But the sentence does not actually say that Sam chopped the spear in half. he says he hacked at it and it broke. So those two things happen. And presumably there is a causal link between the two. But he doesn't necessarily say that, again, we're not being explicitly invited to picture Sam cleaving cleanly through the wood of the spear with his sword. I agree, Nordosapiens, that hack implies sloppy, a sloppy blow. Yeah, I agree. It is also possible that it has been damaged. The spear shaft, I mean. Though I will say, if he hit Frodo's side with the spear head, if he hit Frodo in the ribs hard enough to crack the spear, then, like, Frodo must have ribs of steel if he didn't get his chest cavity completely caved in, which the mithril coat would do. Chainmail would do nothing to prevent, of course. Yeah. To what extent we are being invited to imagine magic happening? So there are two. So one is to imagine this in a totally mundane way. And the word truncheon clearly means the butt end of the spear that he's left holding in his hand after the top part of his spear is broken off. That is now, it's not exactly a club. I mean, he could use it as a club, but it's a truncheon. A truncheon is just like a stick of wood, right? So yeah, he's left with a truncheon in his hand, which again, that just means it's the bit that's left over. Yeah, exactly. As Eric says, it's from Old French for thick stick. Exactly. What has happened? What we are told is that the top of the spear broke off, not was chopped off, broke off. And leaving the orc with a stick in his hand, which he flings down and draws his sword instead. It seems to me that we are being invited to imagine one of three things. And I think it's more or less up to you what you choose to imagine, because we're not told exactly one way or the other. I think these three readings all are consistent with what we know. Number one, Sam, through his sturdy hobbit strength, his panicked adrenaline surge mama bear energy, seeing Frodo hit, and let us not forget the excellence of his Númenórean blade, cleaves through the spear more or less, or at least cleaves through it much of the way, such that it snaps the rest of the way. That's one option. Option number two is that the mithril coat is more than just a bulletproof vest, Middle-earth style. That it is not just a really, really, really hard metal, which prevents which the spear is not capable of penetrating, but that there is also some magic about it. That it protects Frodo, potentially even to the point of damaging the weapon that hit it. There's precedent for such a thing, right? Magic that makes weapons that strike it break, right? Which king does that? All blades perish that pierce that deadly king, right? So again, and that doesn't seem to me the sort of magic which is necessarily evil or intrinsically witch kingery. It's just, we know the Witch King does that, right? So yes, is there a virtue upon the mithril cloak that, or the mithril coat rather, sorry, that might facilitate the damaging of weapons such that, like, when, because it, there, to me, my own experience getting punched in the ribs is the primary thing that inclines me to, in the direction of reading number 2. Because, if he were just caught in the right-hand side and hurled against the wall, that is, if he gets poked with the spear, right? He's jabbed with the spear, and the jab is forceful enough. Plus, of course, one of the consequences of the mithril coat dispersing the force and preventing he was attempting, of course, just to slide the spear all the way through Frodo's body so that the head would come out the other side, right? But that isn't what happened. Instead, the mithril coat stops it and disperses it, which means the entire momentum of his thrust pushes against Frodo instead of, so because we're still dealing with Newton here, right? And that's why Frodo is hurled against the wall, as he would be under those circumstances. But then there's that third verb, and then he's pinned. He isn't just stabbed and flung against the wall, and then like as if the orc had stuck him with the spear, like, sticking something with a pitchfork or something, right? And then he gets flung off and the orc is still standing there. No, he like follows it in and pins him against the wall. So if the orc is it's not just the initial strike that is deflected, but there's like a secondary push against Frodo by the pinning, right? By pinning him against the wall. And so again, it's just like that Frodo's rib cage is not caved in kind of feels a little bit miraculous to me. Mithril coat or no mithril coat. Because again, if you think of the mithril coat in totally mundane ways, that is, if you just imagine it being made of a super, super hard metal that can't be cut or therefore pierced by other metals, then still, what is exactly protecting Frodo's ribcage from the Force? If Frodo's torso, if Frodo's ribcage is between the spear and the wall, as the orc continues to stab him, attempting to finish the job which he mysteriously failed to do when he first tried to run Frodo through on the fly, he would be squashed like a jelly. Yes, exactly. William and Ted and Bert could make him into a pie at that point. But if the spear is in fact being deflected or even cracked, if the deflection of it, and that's the third reading. First reading, this is a Sam story about the strength of Sam's blow and the sharpness of his Númenórean sword. the second option is this is a mithril coat story, and we are seeing one or more virtues that is laid upon this mithril coat, in addition to the mere fact of its being like mithril. The third would be something like providence. That the spear cracked, or even was cracked. It happens, right? I mean, when you do vigorous things with wooden weapons, they break sometimes. And sometimes that's not even something that, is easy to account for. Exactly. Spears break in combat all the time. Absolutely. And yes, Eric, it is very possible to imagine a happy combination of multiples of these factors, right? That by providential chance, there was either a flaw in the wood of the spear, or it had already begun to crack or whatever, and it cracked when it hit Frodo, such that, and then, Eric, as you suggested, Sam's hack strikes it by great good fortune, at just the right weak spot where it was already cracking. But needless to say, with great strength and will, and with a Númenórean blade. And that also, perhaps and to some extent, the mithril coat contributed to the cracking of the spear or whatever. Anyway, I think some combination of these three things could happen, but we're not told. And again, I would draw attention to the change in his syntax. Sam, with a cry, hacked at the spear shaft, and it broke. What do we know for sure? We know that the spear broke. Why did the spear break? How exactly did it break? We don't know. We know that it correlated with Sam's hacking at it, right? But that's what we know, right? Yes, but Eric, again, as you say, that's exactly the point. It's not, he doesn't say Sam broke it. Yes. Remember also that something miraculous has just happened is going to be richly commented upon. We're not asked to believe that this was a normal vicissitude of battle. Aragorn is going to be so surprised that Frodo's alive that he almost drops him. Gandalf is about, in the next slide, to use the word wonder to describe the event. And wonder, not in the simple way in which we normally use the word, like, I wonder what's for dinner tomorrow, but rather, there is time for wonder. He's going to talk about there being time for wonder. Like perceiving a miracle. Yes. Awe. Something awe-inspiring just happened. Gandalf is going to observe that there will be time for awe, for wonder, later on. Yes, exactly, Jackie. Frodo's survival is literally awesome. Aragorn is so filled with awe that, again, he is going to later use the word marvel to describe it. Also a word which has been cheapened in various ways in modern usage, but with that same meaning. Miracle. So I think we're entitled, And again, I don't believe that in the yes, interesting, Eric. Wonder is Old English and marvel is Old French. Yeah, yeah. Um, yes. Um, I don't believe that when the mithril coat is revealed, that it debunks the marvel here. I don't think the situation here is that it looks like a miracle has occurred. But it turns out actually there's not really anything wondrous that has happened here at all. You could have that attitude. But I don't think we're being asked to imagine that. Now, since they don't know he's wearing a mithril coat, it looks like a wonder which is perfectly inexplicable. Right? It's not possible for the flesh of even the toughest hobbit to make a spear thrust by that guy, by Ruckus himself, to make it bounce off his ribs. Like, that couldn't happen. So it looks not only wondrous, but inexplicable. Like some kind of inexplicable divine intervention has happened or something. And then, in the end, it turns out to be explicable intervention. But that doesn't mean that no intervention has happened. It doesn't mean that Providence hasn't played a part. It doesn't mean that the virtue of the mithril coat might not have played a part. It doesn't mean that Sam hasn't played his part. It doesn't mean that the Númenórean blade hasn't played its part. Especially note that Enduril, which is not a Númenórean blade in the same sense, of course. It's a dwarvish blade, technically. But yeah, Jackie, I agree. Jackie says, I like to think Bilbo's blessing plays a part here. Yeah. Y'all will remember that scene. Wasn't that long ago that we did the gift-giving scene with Bilbo trying not to cry and changing the subject and punching Frodo, right? Or slapping him anyway. And this is exactly what he had in mind. Exactly what Bilbo had in mind. He has saved, and Jackrabbit, as you point out, the gift of Thorin Oakenshield as well. Yeah. There is more. Tolkien doesn't strike me as someone who's much of a debunker, right? Who goes in much for demystifying things by pointing out that there's a simple explanation for everything, right? That doesn't seem to be his idiom in general. So that's why I think it's so interesting and significant. That's why I keep coming back to what seems a really simple thing, and it broke. Somehow. I suspect that Tolkien knows perfectly well the likelihood of chopping cleanly through a spear shaft with a short sword. I suspect Tolkien knows perfectly well how improbable that would be. And I think that's why he doesn't say that that's what happened. But he doesn't say what does happen. All we know is that the thing broke. And that's what enables, that's what saves Frodo from being mushed into jelly. And because he can still be crushed as he's pinned against the wall. And of course, in the time that it takes the orc to fling down the truncheon and sweep out the scimitar, is enough time for Aragorn, who is not quite the speed of a striking snake, apparently, but still relatively fast and right behind the orc. I don't know what Ruckus's plan was. If Ruckus, had he skewered Frodo as he meant to, he probably then would have pivoted and continued doing verbs, right? I'm not sure what exactly. But Ruckus's surprise at the failure of his stab, and then Sam's counterblow, seems to have enabled the time for Aragorn to come and chop his head in half. Now, Andúril came down upon his helm. There was a flash like flame. There was a flash. Notice again, what flashed? The flame of the west flashed. But he doesn't say Andúril flashed like flame and the helm burst asunder. He could have said that. He could have said the blade flashed like flame. But he just says, there was a flash. A flash happened, just like so many other things have happened. Andúril came down. There was a flash. If I'm correct, this is the first time we've seen this, isn't it? We got Aragorn killing wolves with it before, but we didn't get any flames, right? I don't think there was any hint of Andúril acting up in any particular way. Yeah, Emily, exactly. It puts the focus on the flash and not the flasher. Yes. And so I think that this is not only, again, capturing Frodo's immediate experience, because remember, this is right in front of his face. The flash. And the blowing up of the helmet. The helm, excuse me. Not the mini helmet. But it's not just that. I think it's also unexpected. This is the first time any of us have seen Andúril do this. Oh, so when it's called the Flame of the West, that's not wholly metaphorical, I guess. It's an actual flame. Now, I might think, Nerdosapiens, that the flash-like flame was just sparks from the helm, which is bursting asunder and being cloven right here. But we will see this again. This is not the last time that Andúril is going to flash like flame. It seems that it clearly does actually flash like flame. Bricktail, see, that's exactly what Bricktail says, doesn't it flash in the sun? But of course that's reflection. Unless it isn't, right? It looks like it. Again, if Aragorn has a flaming sword, you'd think Tolkien would lean into that a little bit, right? But it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And I think that we should just note when it happens. Here, it is happening as it is busting open the very active and verby Ruckus the Orc Chieftain's head. It doesn't flash when he draws it. It doesn't flash when he swings it. It doesn't flash when he holds it up. It flashes in the moment in which it's doing its job. I am Anduril, and I approve this slaying. Anduril is contributing. Yeah, Aspen, it's a little bit like the glowing swords of Gandalf and Frodo, right? Sting and Glamdring, Orcrist. Not exactly the same. They glow in the presence of orcs, right? The presence of orcs make them angry. But Anduril doesn't seem to play that way, right? Anduril doesn't get mad. Anduril gets even, right? Yeah, something like that. The orc fell with cloven head. His followers fled howling as Boromir and Aragorn sprang at them. Yeah. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to talk about that I skipped. Oh, what was it? Boromir gets knocked over backwards, which, by the way, makes total sense. Low man wins. The orc is shorter than he is considerably. And it's barreling in with its shield, and Boromir gets caught flat-footed and knocked on his keister. Yeah. That'll happen. He comes in, he blows up Boromir, knocks him over backwards. He's staying low the whole time. He leaps into the chamber, but he's staying low. What was the other thing I wanted to talk about? I can't remember. I feel like there's another thing I skipped over. Why Frodo? Alexander, that was it. Why Frodo? Why Frodo? We will end with this because we're late. Because on account of there's no field trip tonight, because my Windows installation is totally unresponsive this evening, so I can't get Lotro to run. The targeting of Frodo. That's the final thing, and then we're done. It could just be a coincidence. It's possible. But this is now the second time that something has sprung up assaulting the company and singled out Frodo. Bricktail's exactly as you say. I'm thinking of the Watcher. And you'll remember that the narrator prompted us to ask that question then. They don't talk about it, and we're not given any information. But the narrator makes sure that we think about the fact that of all the company, it seized on Frodo too. What about this orc? Now, on the one hand, it would be easy enough to suggest that he's not singling Frodo out, per se. I mean, if you think about it, he's the third person that, Ruckus engages with 3 people. Frodo's the third. 4, I guess. Sam engages with him. Right? He goes for Boromir first. Knocks him down. He dives under Aragorn's bow. So Aragorn swings at him and he dives under it. Which is a good maneuver if someone's swinging a sword at your head. Right? Now, yes, it is possible to read this as he was gunning for Frodo the whole time. And so he went through Boromir and under Aragorn with the single-minded intention of getting at Frodo. It's possible to read it that way. I'm not sure I buy that. That is to say, Ruckus's actions seem to me to have a perfectly logical explanation. Just thinking from a combat choreography standpoint, Boromir, we know, is standing right inside the door. Boromir is the first line of defense. That's been clear. So that the first thing he encounters when he leaps into the door is Boromir is what we should expect. Of course it is. So he's got to deal with Boromir. And Boromir, what's more, is attacking him. So he, presumably because of the side of his body that Boromir is attacking from, deflects with his shield. And being the low man, right, drives right through Boromir and knocks him back on his butt. He is now out of the way. But there's this other big dude. Big dude number 2 is swinging a big sword, which may or may not flash straight at his head, right? And not wanting his cranium to get better acquainted with that sword, he performs a perfectly logical maneuver, which is to duck and roll under the sword strike. But when he goes under, when he dives is the verb, diving under Aragorn's blow. So he dives under. The momentum of that dive, whose first objective was to evade the stroke of Andúril, brings him up now in the middle of the hobbits. And there's Frodo, whom he then spears with his sword. Sorry, with his spear, I mean. I don't think that any of that implies or necessitates the idea that Frodo was his purpose all along. Merry, Pippin, Maureen, as you say, they're out the door. They hadn't reached the stairway, but they're out the door. Frodo's inside the door. Legolas and Gandalf, not 100% sure exactly where they're standing in relation, but they seem to be on the fringes. Because remember, the rest of the orcs have just fled, so the melee has just ended. JJ asks a very sensible question. So he's just recklessly diving as deep into the defensive formation as he can. Yeah, it does seem reckless, Mudmore. I totally agree. It's a strange way. What's going on here? The orcs just ran away. Their chieftain, who is presumably the guy who's been blowing the horn and probably shouting orders. Remember the harsh voices shouting orders? Probably his, right? Yeah, Ruckus the Reckless. I can get behind that, Johnny. I think, as far as I can tell, I mean, what it seems like is that Ruckus, the chieftain, is basically pulling oh, come on, boys, it's like this. Let me show you how it's done. He's leading the way. And I think that he means, for the rest of his followers, where are they? Clustered in the doorway. They haven't run off. They're right there. I think he's making an opening. Intending for his followers to pile in after him. By the way, I suspect that's a big, one big reason why he does what he does with Boromir. He doesn't stop to try to fight Boromir. He deflects his sword and then knocks him down. Well, hey, look, guys. Big warrior on his back on the ground. Pounce. Because, you fall on your back in the middle of a battlefield. It's a bad lookout, right? Good chance you're not getting up again. So, yeah. Yeah. Makes all kinds of sense. Reckless sense. Very bold, very reckless. And of course, his followers flee howling instead. So it doesn't work. But although it's a very bold and exceptionally risky and reckless plan, it's not a horrible plan. It's not a horrible plan. If you're a battle leader, like this guy seems to be, he's leading in battle. And how? But, but do I think there is any reason other than sheer coincidence that it's Frodo that he attacks? Yeah. Sorry. Like JJ's adapted Hobbit quote. To me, trolls and balrogs, to me, oh my kinsfolk. Yeah, of course, adapted from Thorin's quote as he charges out of the gates in the Battle of the Five Armies. Yeah. I think it is possible that there is something of the Watcher in the Water effect here. Let's assume that when he does his duck and cover under the swing of Andúril and he comes up on his feet with his spear, he finds himself confronting hobbitry, right? Now, Merry and Pippin are closest to the door, so let's assume it's Frodo and Sam. Why does he choose Frodo and not Sam? He could have skewered Sam. He doesn't skewer Sam. He skewers Frodo instead. Why? Could there be something? Could there be some sense? Could there be something about Frodo that somehow, for some reason, draws his attention and he doesn't understand or process it at all? Is there something that just, again, draws his focus on Frodo? Aranos, that's a better reason. Is Frodo holding a glowing blade? Yes, he is. And we know how the orcs respond. So Gandalf, of course, is also holding a glowing blade, which is presumably even more threatening than Sting. And yet, yeah. Anyway. So yes, he could certainly see, of the two of them, the sword that is glowing with violent antipathy to orc kind might possibly lead him to think that Frodo is the greater threat of the two. So again, it could be these things. But to end as we began, it also seems to me deeply uncoincidental that all of it's, I think in saying that all of these injuries, all of this negative attention comes to Frodo is not necessarily a product of the ring bringing it to him, but just because it's what it means to be the ring bearer. He's gonna get stabbed. And, I don't lay great stress on the parallel with the spear in Jesus' side. But it isn't nothing either, Again, thinking back to the initial conversation we were having today about ring bearerhood and what it means. He's a hurt magnet, Turadel. Exactly. Um, so and he's also the point of view protagonist through most of this. I think certainly through this scene. It makes it more personal. Had, even assuming the skewering didn't happen, had the orc come in and, clubbed Pippin upside the head or something like that, fulfilling perhaps a dark inner fantasy of Gandalf's, like it could have accomplished a similar sort of thing, right? That is showing the danger and sudden danger leaping out and whatnot, peril of the company and that and all that. But it doesn't have the same impact as Frodo, the ring bearer, whose job it is to endure through suffering to the end. I think it's part of his ring bearership. He's part of the ring burden in a sense. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Remind me at the beginning of next time to come back to the last two lines here on this slide. As part, we'll kind of fold that in with the beginning of the next slide. Gandalf's big plan. But it's now super late. I'm now being wholly irresponsible tonight. Indulging myself with extra discussion because it's a no field trip night and now it's super late. So I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I should also tell you, I think there's an outside chance that I'll be here next week, but probably not. I believe I've been doing college visits with my youngest, and we are speculating about one more trip next week for one final round of college visiting. And that's more or less our plan. It could still change depending on some other events, but most likely we'll be away next Tuesday. So probably no class next week. But then I should be back the week after in September. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good night now. See you guys most likely in a fortnight. Bye now.